Hey guys, welcome. Today I'm honored to introduce Kianna Goodwin from Kianna Victoria Brand and Web Design. She specializes in brand and web design for wedding industry professionals and online service providers. Before we dive in, where can those watching or listening find you online and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website at kiannavictoria.com, but also on Facebook and Instagram at I'm Kianna Victoria.
I'm sure there will be people interested in finding out more about your work as they're watching. I just wanted to provide that information ahead of time to our viewers, so thanks for sharing.
No, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so let's start with some interesting statistics. According to research, 70% of consumers determine their buying decision based on brand. So can you tell us what is branding? I'm sure it is more than just your logo or color theme palette, typography. It also has to do with your words and message, correct?
That's absolutely right. And I can be the one to also agree that I also connect with a brand based on what's behind it. And nonetheless, for our businesses nowadays, when it comes to a brand and website, I always like to start with the brand. I see it as a foundation of the business that's going to propel it forward. And so if we are trying to define it or trying to understand a little bit better what it actually is, branding is the emotive response that is associated with your business. And so when we are creating a brand around that business, we're building a relationship with our audience because they're starting to resonate with our vision, our values, our voice, and then that's when the visuals come into place. I like to think of it as a house. So whenever somebody's trying to build a house, obviously there has to be a foundation for the house. It's really hard to build a house without a foundation.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so you have to start with the foundation and then you build the walls, you build the roof, the flooring, the inside, the interior. So once you start with your business to create a brand, you always want to start with that foundation. And that is what we call a brand strategy, to have that in place. And then from there, we can build a brand's identity, which is the colors, the logos, more of the visual aspects of your brand. As creatives, as people in the wedding industry, we'll always gravitate towards the more visual, the actual experience that we provide our clients through the work or the craft, the actual tangible things that we create. But when it comes to actually accomplishing this, I think that the first step is to just recognize that we have to start with the foundation. From there, you can move forward to the identity. But once we are in this very first step of creating a foundation for our brand, which is the brand strategy, we always need to remember, I like to remember four things when creating a strategy or creating that baseline foundation for our business, which is the brand strategy, is who we are, what we do it for, who we do it for, and how do we do that. So whenever we have these questions established, which is the foundation, that's honestly the messaging that we're going to come across to our clients. That's going to position, and then that's when the positioning comes into play, because we're going to be able to position our service in front of the right people because we know exactly who we're trying to target and what are their likes, what do they not, how can our service or our product benefit them and solve a problem for them. So honestly, the very first step would be to establish that brand strategy, and then from there you can move on to the visuals, which would be the next step.
You just mentioned messaging and positioning the brand to be able to connect with our audience and clients. How can we accomplish that? Because I see a lot of photographers overdo it when it comes to their design. That can cause some to get lost in a sea of brands. And what causes people to get confused, and how can we avoid this?
Yeah, honestly, I think this is one of my favorite steps of the process, and one that often gets overlooked. As you mentioned, as creatives, we are more interested in the visuals. We're more interested on the looks of something, right? And that's honestly what we do as creatives. But when it comes to creating a brand and something that's going to attract the right type of clients, we always want to start with that foundation, which is the brand strategy. And with that, obviously, comes the messaging, the positioning, and the values, the voice, all the things we had mentioned priorly. But we have to have those established, and we have to figure those things out to be able to translate that into a design, into visuals, into that brand identity. So once we have the strategy in place, we can move forward and use that as a blueprint to create something that actually both feels aligned for the client and for ourselves. And once that happens, the sales are going to be even easier. track marketing is going to be even easier. We will be able to not only use our brand to attract clients, but also stand out amongst our industry peers.
Great, great, awesome. Thanks for sharing. This leads to my next question. When do you need to do a full rebrand, and what signs indicates that you're ready to rebrand?
Yes, this is a great one also because sometimes we feel stuck in our brand. Honestly, that's a sign that we need to rebrand. In the past, clients have come to me for various reasons, but there's three reasons that honestly stand out the most. The first is that the business has evolved, or the business's goals, the services have honestly changed since the beginning of the start of the business. A second one is that the brand visuals, so basically the brand strategy and the brand identity, the visuals aren't matching up. And this is causing a problem in the way and that the brand or the business is being presented to the audience. And then a third one is that the ideal client isn't being connected with the brand. And this is more of, it could be more of an identity problem. Sometimes our visuals aren't matching up with the style of our client, even our personal style. It's not really matching up visually. But when it comes to these three, again, having those foundations in place is the place to start. So if you feel like you're in a position where I don't know where to start, I know I need to rebrand, always start with the brand strategy and always go back to those vision, the values, the voice. Use that to be able to create a brand identity that matches with that.
Once a brand is complete, it makes sense to display that brand through a website. Where do you even get started with that? And what is the purpose of web design?
Exactly. So obviously you have a brand, you start with the strategy, you have the identity. Now it needs to be born to the world, right? It's honestly one of my favorite parts, creating a website. So again, once we were talking about the brand, we kind of tend to focus only on the visuals, but the same applies for a website, designing it and the strategy behind it as well. So we always like to start or keep in mind the brand we created. And this is honestly going to be the guide to help us create something that feels aligned, something that's going to attract our right client, and something that's going to help us stand out. So three things I like to keep in mind, and these are honestly actionable steps that you can start to use when creating your own website. Number one, we always want to keep the brand in mind. And by the brand, we mean the strategy and the identity. So everything that we created, from the messaging, the positioning, the values, the why behind the brand, this needs to be very evident throughout the website copy, through the homepage, the sales pages, all pages on our website. We always want to keep that brand in mind. When it comes to actually creating the design of the website, this is step number two. Create a design that actually matches the brand's vibe or the brand's energy. Kind of taking it away from strategy or identity, we want to make sure that our ideal client also relates to our style, because in effect, that is going to determine what type of ideal client we're trying to attract. And then the third point would be target your ideal client through SEO. And this is something that you kind of sometimes dread or don't even know where to start. I always recommend my clients to do SEO research. Look up keywords or phrases that your clients would use on search engines like Google to find you. Maybe you're located in Oregon wedding photographer. Use those throughout the process, throughout the back end of your business, throughout the back end of your website, to be able to create a strategic, not only strategic website, but also a website that is going to truly target and attract your ideal client.
And for the final question, Kianna, how do you create a website that makes you stand out while making sales?
Yeah, that's a very important one. And just as we had mentioned in the brand questions of how to create a brand, the same thing applies for a website. But honestly, we're at a better advantage once we're at the website step because we already have a brand established, which is going to help us or guide us to be able to create a website that matches with our brand. And so I typically remind these three steps to my clients whenever they're trying to create a website on their own or DIYing their whole process. So the first would be to create a website both with the strategy and the design, always keeping the brand in mind. And obviously we're creatives, we love the visuals, and those are great and important steps in the process, but always starting with the strategy behind the website. Keep in mind the brand's messaging, the values, the positioning, who we're trying to target, how are we going to do that, always keep your ideal client in mind and use that as a baseline to be able to create, again, a website strategy. A second point I always like to remind my clients is to do some SEO research and always keep your target audience in mind. If you're based in Oregon, maybe you're going to want to look for wedding photographers in Oregon. Just think in the language that your clients would think. SEO can be very intimidating, but I always remind my people that use the language that your clients would use to look for you. Or maybe you can put yourself in the position of, if I were looking for a professional, what language or what terms would I put or insert in a search engine like Google to be able to find the solution to my problem? And then also is to create or have some copy, website copy, which is the actual text that resonates with your ideal client. So kind of going back to the brand messaging, use messages and use paragraphs and text that actually relate to your client. Obviously, share your story, share the process behind what you do, but always keep your ideal client in mind when you're trying to message and position them. Ideally, that's what's going to help you to market better and make sales.
It was a pleasure to have you join me today, Kianna. Thank you for providing so much value and knowledge. I will include Kianna's links in the description below so you guys can check her out. Stay tuned though, because there might be part 2 coming. There's just so much to cover when it comes to branding and web design. We may have another discussion later this year and expand on the things that we just went over. But for now, thanks so much, Kianna.
No, thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate all what you do, and I hope to chat with you soon.